What up, geniuses? E here. Today we're going to be looking at the biggest winners and losers of what we know so far about the upcoming patch 8.5. We'll start off with the winners and then we will wrap it up with the losers. There are many more winners than losers on this list. Only a few losers, though the losses are pretty severe. So to start off, the first small winner, in my opinion, is Dwarves. Dwarves got a small change in the form of Monroe, and that's the only direct buff that they got. But Dwarves are one of the few archetypes, we'll say, that can take advantage of armor. So the change to Enchanted Armor and the change to Armory may both be able to affect Dwarves in a positive way. They have cards like Dwarven Berserker, they have cards like Yarpen Zigrin. They have a few ways to take advantage of this, and maybe that little help will help to push Dwarves just a little bit closer to being good. The next small buff is Nilfgaard Soldiers. People have been begging for soldier improvements, and even though this isn't much, it's a step in the right direction. Imperial Formation has received a buff that whenever you play a soldier, you will give it armor for each adjacent soldier. Nilfgaard doesn't have too many good ways to take advantage of the armor. They have things like Tortoise, they have things like Crossbowmen, but those don't really turn armor into points. They just benefit from having armor. So I don't know how helpful this is going to be, but we did get a 1 provision buff to Vreemd, which is a card I'm a big fan of. It can play for a lot in a deck like Soldier Swarm or a deck like Slave Infantry. And we also got a 1 power buff to Vrigith. So all in all, a 2-point buff and a little bit of help from the leader change. I don't know if this is going to warrant playing Imperial Formation, to be honest. I think in my Slave Infantry deck, I would still just play Imprisonment myself. But if you could maybe try to do some funky stuff. Maybe an offensive Yen, maybe a card like Wolfsbane could even be useful if you got a bunch of armor. It's not going to be great, but hey, it's something. Next buff is to any strategy that can employ Shoop and Redea. So Shoop didn't get a buff, right? But if you're going to be playing Redea, which did get a buff in the form of all the Stratagems changing, you're going to be playing Shoop too. The deck that comes to mind is Deathwish Monsters. So the change to Urn of Shadows is pretty big. And Deathwish Monsters did also get some small changes that I think could benefit them. So for one, they have the Foglet change. Foglet now spawns Fog on an enemy row for 3 turns after it is killed. That is his new Deathwish effect. And that is 10 points. It's the 4-point body of the Foglet plus 6 points from this Fog, assuming you get all the points for it. That's the best 4-point bronze that Deathwish has to offer. The previous best one being an 8 for 4. So pretty big improvement. Might help the deck out a little bit. We'll see. But the Urn of Shadows change is going to be big. You're going to have the opportunity, especially if you're playing like a Redea type strategy, you'll have the opportunity to spawn an Urn of Shadows in round 3. And then the most points you can get out of Urn of Shadows is going to be on Penitent into Pugo Boombreaker. Perhaps you're playing something like Pugo and the Beast, or Pugo and your Imperial Manticore, something like that. You can set down your Penitent, trigger it with your Urn of Shadows, and then consume it and get both a Pugo and a Beast or a whatever other 7 provision monster card you'd like onto the board. Going to be a pretty big point swing. So a deck like that I think could see some play, and I think is going to be beneficial overall to Deathwish Monsters. The last small winner is going to be Wild Hunt. So Aridin is the boss monster of Wild Hunt, and he got a 1 power buff from 5 to 6. Now, that might not sound like much, it's only 1 power, but the big problem with Aridin before was that he was very easy to remove. Your opponent only needed 5 power to remove him. If you were trying to play the Frost Leader, which is something that you would perhaps like to play with Wild Hunt, then you had no way to boost him. You kind of had to play Carapace. Wild Hunt's been a bit of a mess for a while, but Aridin cannot be removed by bronze removal anymore. That's going to be a pretty big deal. Also, Ancient Foglet. When you play it, it's going to boost itself for every weather duration on the opponent's side. Now, this does not say the opponent's row. This says their side. So that means both rows are going to count. So you say you got your Foglet on the field, you play your Ardgaith, it's going to put Frost for 3 turns on each row, and your Foglet is going to boost itself by 6, already playing as a 10 for 6. You're going to have a lot of other opportunities to put Frost on the rows, hopefully. Obviously, the problem with this is Frost is not that good. Weather is not that good in general. Your opponent can very easily play around it by row stacking. But hey, I think it's going to be useful. We already had one engine for Frost in the form of Naglfar's crew. Now we just have another. Maybe it'll make Wild Hunt a little bit more playable. I'm a big fan of the Wild Hunt archetype, so I hope so. So that's it for the small winners. On to the big winners. And our Swarm is our first big winner. There's going to be a lot of different ways that we can play this deck. We now have Poor Fucking Infantry. That is going to be the first big improvement. It's a way to get 3 bodies on the field for cheap. It has decent point evaluation. 5 for 4 is not great, but if you get the bonded tag, it's going to be an 8 for 4. And, you know, for putting 3 bodies on the field, that's nothing to sneeze at. Meve has gained the ability to reset herself, so if you can keep her safe for a long round, she has the potential to go off 3 times instead of 1 time. That could just end up being really good. Maybe the deck will start playing Defender or something like that to try to keep Meve alive for a long time. But also, in order to help keep her alive, they've given her the additional effect that anytime you boost her, she's going to gain 1 armor. So if you're boosting her by 1, if you're playing something like Royal Inspiration, you might be able to just give her a boost every turn and armor. Then it's going to take your opponent double the damage to get rid of her inspiredness. Foltest is another big boost. Foltest is a boost to a few decks. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways Swarm is played. Foltest is not going to be useful in like the way that I have been playing Swarm with the boats, creating a bunch of volunteers and things like that. But it will be very useful if you want to do something like a Dun Banner Swarm. Now all you have to do is play your Dun Banner, play the Foltest next to it. The Foltest will boost the Dun Banner and produce 1 in your deck. Your Dun Banner will go off and pull the other Dun Banners out of your deck. It's just going to be an automatic 3-point per turn engine if you can keep your Foltest alive. Pretty good, much better. You used to have to play a Temerian Drummer or something like that alongside this. It just made the combo a bit bigger, a bit clunkier. You had to keep much more stuff alive. And this change is going to really help the Dun Banner Swarm idea. Next big winner is Vampire. So Vampire's got a 1-point buff to Elder, but similar to the Eridan buff, this is a pretty relevant one. It's going to change from 5 power to 6 power, so it's no longer going to die to bronze removal. Elder is a super powerful card, but difficult to keep on the board. This is going to force your opponent to play either a Heat Wave or some sort of gold 6-point removal like a Decoction or a Parasite or something like that to get rid of it. 6-point removal is not that prevalent right now. Perhaps it will become more prevalent since we're seeing quite a few buffs from 5 to 6. But at the moment, I mean, this thing's just gonna live a long time and do a lot of bleeding damage. The next big buff for vampires is Deadlift, and I think this is a bigger buff. So it currently says deploy Spawn Blood Moon on an enemy row for 1 turn, increase the duration by 1 for every adjacent vampire. Now, the buff here is it's going to increase the duration by 2 for every adjacent vampire. So if you're able to play this thing between 2 vampires, which is not difficult, especially if you're playing a dedicated vampire deck, you will get 2 extra turns of Blood Moon, which translates into 4 extra points of bleeding. So we just have a 5-point buff to the vampire archetype, as well as keeping Elder on the board longer. That's going to be worth some sort of points as well. You might consider that an additional 1-point buff because 5p removal doesn't remove it. Your opponent needs to use 6-point removal, but I think it's actually more than that. So it's probably a total of somewhere around 6 or 7-point buff for vampires. I still don't think it's going to quite be enough. The problem vampires have is not that their points aren't there, right? Their points are there if your opponent gives you things to make points on. But these changes don't really matter if your opponent is not putting bodies on the board, and they don't really matter in the sense that you still can't remove stuff. So the big problem vampires have is they pretty much have to play Devotion in order to get the Unseen Elder benefit, and With Devotion, they just don't have any ability to remove anything. This doesn't change that. We'll see. We'll see if it's enough. I think it's just gonna be a bit of a more polarizing deck now. If you're swarmy, they're just gonna crush you. If you are like a uninteractive deck, a unitless deck, or something that plays big threats that they have to get rid of, something like Carapace, they're just not going to be able to deal with you. So I don't know that I like it. I mean, vampires are kind of bad, let's be real, even with these cards. So I'm happy to see some sort of buff, but I hope to see some sort of devotion removal for vampires going forward. Maybe something that requires you to have a vampire on the field. I would be okay with that if they don't want to give monsters too much removal because it's not really in their faction identity. Yeah, we'll see where they go with that. The next big buff is to the SK discard package. So the discard package was already pretty strong. You got cards like your Skirmishers, your Heyme Scalds, your Burna Brands. You got quite a few cards that synergize really well with the discard package. Morkvarg, of course. And now there's just extra help. So the Mask of Ouroboros change in the stratagem is going to be pretty big. It's just a strict 2-point buff. Of course, it's going to be only in round 1 unless you elect to play Redea. The discard package is typically something you're going to be trying to play in round 1 to thin out your deck. Hey, we'll take a 2-point change. The next big buff to the SK discard package is Coral. So I missed this in my video where I went over the changes in the patch, but Coral now will damage an enemy unit by 2 for any discarded card. It used to just be a discarded special card. You really don't want to be discarding specials. They don't have any other synergy like that. But now, even if you play, say you play a Heyme Scald into a Skirmisher, you're going to get your 8-point tempo play. You're also going to get 2 points of damage off of your Coral, who has now been boosted from a 5 to a 6. So definitely useful. It's going to be harder to remove. Just another one of these 5-point gold engines changing into a 6-point engine. It's good. I think it's a good change altogether. Decks that can use the discard package, of course, Lippy is the first one that comes to everybody's mind, but also the Gettynith deck. So currently, most Gettynith players are playing the Portal into the Bear Witcher Mentor combo, but before that came out, you used to play the discard package. It might just be worth playing the discard package again with all this additional synergies. The next big winner, and I think the biggest winner with the changes on this list, is the Northern Realms Blue Stripe strategies, Commandos. So they, of course, got Foltest, the new and improved Foltest. So if you were playing Foltest in your old Commandos, it's just going to get better now. If you weren't playing Foltest, maybe you ought to consider it. Just an additional way to be spawning Commandos in your deck. Of course, the Foltest will just automatically get a payoff the first turn that it's played, which is going to play for 4 points of carryover minimally, which will make your Foltest on deploy play for 10 points. Actually 11 points because the boost as well. So that makes it play as an 11 for 11 right there. It seems pretty good to me. And then you just have an engine going. It's not that easy to remove. Yeah, I think Foltest is going to be definitely the correct way to play Blue Stripes. Now, personally, I had not been playing the old Foltest in my Blue Stripes, but we'll see how it goes. I think the bigger buff, though, for Blue Stripes is the leader change. The Inspired Zeal leader has gotten a 4-point buff, a 3-point direct buff, but I'm going to count it as a 4-point buff because almost always you're going to use one of these leader charges on a Seltkirk. So you're going to play your Seltkirk in the front row. Seltkirk has the order ability to duel a unit. You're going to give it Zeal and boost it. Used to be you'd boost it by 1, so it would become a 6, and you could do 6 points of damage on your opponent's side. Now you're going to boost it by 2, and you're going to be able to do 7 points of damage on your opponent's side of the board. Definitely big. I mean, 4 points is nothing to sneeze at, especially in a leader ability. You know, that's 4 points of carryover. I think Blue Stripes is going to be really strong. The deck's already pretty good, but after these changes, I think Blue Stripe's going to hop right back into the meta. So we will see. The last big winner for the reveals from patch 8.5 is AQ. Now, no, they didn't get anything to help them, but they didn't get anything to hurt them either. AQ is arguably the second best deck of the format, and this deck hasn't been touched at all, at least yet. It's hard to decide what nerf to really give that deck. I would think about maybe reducing the leader charges from 5 to 4. It ends up being quite a bit bigger nerf than you might think, because usually one of those drones is going to end up playing for 3-4 points throughout the course of a round 3, once you get all the boosts and things on it, of course. So maybe that's something that they could consider doing. I don't know, but I have the feeling AQ is going to be running rampant. The thing about AQ is it can never be that popular, right? Because it's easy to beat if you're building your deck around it. All you got to do is play some Lacerates, play a Yurden, play something like that, and the deck can't really do anything about it. So maybe that's what they're thinking, is AQ is just a counter to the current meta, and when they knock out the current stuff and AQ is just the best deck, then people are just going to play more wide punish and punish that deck. So we'll see. As of now, we don't know any changes for AQ, and I'm thinking they're going to be really, really strong still. Okay, on to the losers, everybody's favorite part. So the first loser is SK Iced. So Iced now has Bloodthirst 3 instead of Bloodthirst 2 to get the discard ability. Bloodthirst 3 is a lot harder to come by. I know a lot of people are not happy with this change. They think it's not enough. Iced is still going to be a problem. But personally, I really like this change. I think in Gwent, it's good to have cards that have a nice payoff if you complete the setup. And Bloodthirst 3 is a real setup, you know. This deck can't play Patricidal Fury or anything like that, like decks that try to get Bloodthirst 3 in the past have. One of the problems with the Ice deck is if you're trying to bleed them, they can oftentimes just play a bunch of shitty cards and then play Iced once they have their Bloodthirst 2, which is not that hard to come by, and get way ahead, and then you just don't get your card back, and you have to go a card down in round 3 and face a Herald, and it's just going to be a disaster. But now with Bloodthirst 3, it's going to be a lot harder for them to come by this, especially when you're bleeding them. And you may be able to bleed the Ice out of them, the Herald out of them, a bunch of stuff, and they're just not gonna have anything left for round 3. I think it's a good change. CDPR has had a bit of a reputation for killing things with fire when they wanted to buff it. And I think this was a perfect buff, really appropriate. Next loser, and quite a bit bigger loser, but not the biggest, is the Crimes deck. The Intimidate deck, the Line Pocket deck, whatever you want to call it. The deck took some pretty big hits, the biggest of which, in my opinion, is the Safecracker change. So Safecracker has lost its Intimidate tag. So it got a power buff. It used to be 3 power, now it's 4 power, base power, and it's going to boost itself by every crime you have in your hand when you play it. So the tempo is still going to be there, but without the Intimidate tag, it's losing a lot. So it wasn't uncommon before for someone to play a Safecracker, it boosts itself to 7, play your second Safecracker, boosts itself to 7, and then play all 4 of your crimes that round, and all of a sudden you have an 11 for 5, 11-point Safecracker. Can be even more than that if you have more crimes in your hand to start. But now you're just going to be losing out on those additional points. It's going to be a nerf in the round 1 of, my estimate is anywhere between 3 and 10 points per game, depending if they decide to play both of their Safecrackers and stuff like that. 10 points is a lot, you know, and the big thing that SY had going for them with these Safecrackers is super duper difficult to beat them round 1. They would win on even a lot of the time in round 1, and I don't think they're going to be able to abuse red coin like that anymore. They're going to have a lot more fair round 1, and it's going to make the rest of the deck not quite as powerful, because they're going to have to play some actual cards round 1. They used to just be able to get away with playing Safecracker, Justice into Safecracker, and then a bunch of 4 and 5p crimes. I don't think they're going to get away with that anymore. It's a pretty big hit. I think it's definitely deserved. Now, the next hit is interesting. Something I think is probably also deserved, but it might be a little bit overboard, to be honest. I think the Safecracker nerf is really big. But Cleaver is now not going to have his armor. So without armor, Cleaver is going to come out, without any setup, he'll come out as a 5, right? So he's going to play, he's 1 base power, he's going to come out and he's going to spawn Shakedown, which is going to boost him by 3, and then his Intimidate, if he has no Crown Splitters around him, is 1, and he's going to be a 5. He's going to be able to be removed by Bronze Removal. Also, notably, Ancrate Longship will kill him on deploy now. The Longship used to just ping the armor away. Now it's just going to kill his 1-point body. So pretty big nerf to Cleaver. I like the idea of it, though, in the sense that he hasn't lost any actual points. You just have to... You can't just slam him down willy-nilly now. It used to be you'd go into round 2, your opponent's bleeding you, they just slam down Cleaver, produce a bunch of Cleaver's muscles, and there's not really much you could do about it. He'd come out as a 7. You could heat wave it, of course, but he already got to spend his coins at the nice ratio. Now when you play Cleaver, you're going to have to make sure that you have some Crown Splitters around, get him up to a 6 or a 7, so that your opponent cannot just remove him with a Nature's Rebuke. Lastly, we have what I believe to be the clear biggest loser of the patch, Nilfgaard Ball, and altogether Nilfgaard in general. Nilfgaard did get a little bit of help in the way of soldiers, but soldiers are not very competitive. I don't think this 2-point buff and some armor is going to make them competitive. And Ball was really all Nilfgaard has. I have to say, at first I was really excited about this change. It does definitely nerf the hell out of Ball. Ball now says that it will only be triggered by aristocrats played on your side of the board. This means when you play your Joachim, when you play your Roderick, when you coup either one of those, no longer are you able to proc your Ball. This means if you want to play your Ball in round 3, or anywhere else for that matter, but especially relevant in round 3, you have to save some shitty bronze aristocrats to trigger your Ball, which makes your ceiling much, much lower, especially in a short round 3. The ability you had before to do something like go Ball, Joachim, coup into Joachim in a short round 3 was outrageous. You can't do that anymore. The difference in points between that and something like Ball, Van Morleham Hunter, Seditious Aristocrat or something like that, the point change is just massive. NG really leaned on Ball. They don't have anything else. My problem with this change is that Ball is not really the issue. 2 seasons ago, when the Chinese meta breaker really came out, before that, Nilfgaard wasn't seeing much play. Ball wasn't seeing much play in general. Obviously, it was very strong in Lockdown before Lockdown got neutered. But after the Lockdown change, it wasn't seeing much until the double Joachim interaction was discovered. I think the correct change was to change Gorthrig Evade to say move a non-disloyal unit to the top of your opponent's deck from their graveyard. That knocks out the double Joachim. Playing Joachim 4 times is just not fair in my opinion. Then Ball could stay the same. You know, it's a 15 provision card. I don't see people wanting to spend 15 provisions on a card that requires you to play shitty bronzes. Amir is an aristocrat, but Amir kind of sucks. Of course, he did get a little bit of a buff in this patch, but I don't think it's going to be enough. I don't see Nilfgaard being very strong this next season. Now, there are still more patch notes to come. Maybe Nilfgaard gets some big buffs. Maybe soldiers get some really big buffs. Maybe in the next set we're going to see some real changes to Nilfgaard. But man, they're really in a sad state, I gotta say. And I like Nilfgaard. I know a lot of people hate on them, but I like Nilfgaard. I think they're a really fun and interesting deck. The Chinese Meta Breaker was a really high skill cap deck, which I always appreciate. But yeah, now Ball is dead. So we'll have to see if people try to play it with aristocrats or if NG just falls by the wayside. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, please leave me a like. Consider subscribing. I would love that. Please let me know in the comments below, what decks do you think are the biggest winners and losers of this patch? Did I miss anything? Did I overvalue any of these buffs? Undervalue some of these nerfs? Or overestimate their damage, we'll say. Just let me know that. So I had a great time making this video. I will see you guys next time.